Compound interest. Now, on previous lessons, we were looking at simple interest. However, simple interest is rarely used in the real world. The financial world depends on compound interest to make money. Now, keeping that in mind, let's consider this example. Okay, consider a savings account with $100 in it, earning 10% interest each year. So far, if we wanted to know how much money would be in the account in 3 years, using simple interest, let's underline this, we would do the following calculation. So let's just quickly do that, right? So using simple interest, what did we do? First, we have to find out the interest earned, which is equal, and that's the formula, I equals PRT that we used. And of course, what is our principal? Our principal will be the $100 times the interest earned, which is in this case 10%, which is 0.10, times the number of years. So in this case it's 3 years. So let's put that here, right? Well, if we multiply these three, we get $30. Yes, so I'm going to put this with a dollar sign, $30 for interest earned. That means that after 3 years, if you invest $100 after 3 years, you're earning $30. And of course, if we want to know the final amount, how much we have made, basically we add those two, and we know that after 3 years, using simple interest, an investment of $100 turns into $130. Okay, but now let's consider that same example, right? But using compound interest. Right? Now remember, using simple interest, after 3 years we have $130. But using compound interest, what happens? And in fact, before I show you this, let me just emphasize the following. That this means, what does this tell us? This tells us that over 3 years, you earned $30 in interest, or that means $10 each year. Right? Let's write this down actually. Okay, this tells us that over 3 years you earn $30 in interest or $10 each year. Right? So year 1, $10, year 2 another 10, and then year 3 another 10. It's a total of 30, and then we add that to the principal and we get this much. Now, if we were to consider that same example, but instead of using simple interest, we would use compound interest. But what is the difference? The difference is this, which is what I wanted to show you before. Let's move this up a little bit. That means that in compound interest, the interest is not only calculated at the end of the 3 years. In fact, it is calculated at least once a year, depending on the investment. In the above example, at the end of the first year, the interest was $10. But when we are calculating compound interest, for the second year, you therefore have $110 in the bank that can earn interest. And so we continue this calculation for the following years. Okay, so therefore, let's move this up a little more. Therefore, the calculation for compound interest for the example in question should really be, so in other words, let's use the same parameters that this example is giving us, but instead of using simple interest, let's use compound interest. And so let's take a look. So I suggest on a separate sheet of paper, well, first, write this down on your notes. On a separate sheet of paper, we're going to make a table that looks like this. Okay, and basically we're going to have, we are investing this for 3 years, right? So basically what happened on the first year, let's put year 1, what happens? The principal is $100 because that's what the problem was saying, right? And we're going to calculate the interest earned in that first year. So that means we multiply 100 times, now the interest rate was, let me recall, it was 10%. So it was 10%, so 0.1, right, or 0.10, and the the amount of time in this case, because it's only 1 year, we're calculating it after 1 year, so it's times 1. So this times that gives us $10, and then when we add this plus that, so in other words 100 plus 10, that gives us $110. So on the first year, which is what we were pointing out in the example, on the first year we end up with $110. Now, as it indicates here, let's read it again just for explanation's sake. Therefore, where is it? Yep, right here. At the end of the first year, the interest was $10, which we just saw. But when we're calculating compound interest for the second year, you therefore have $110. So that's why it's called compounded, because now it's not that we're investing $100, right, like in simple interest, but we take this amount, and now for the second year, that amount, this amount right here that I'm underlining, $110, becomes our principal for the next year, $110. And so we calculate, let me extend this a little more. And so we calculate $110 times the interest rate times 1 now for the end of the year. So now what would that be? Well, this becomes $11. And now we add the $11 to the principal right here. So 110 plus 11, this becomes 121. And now this amount for the next year, in this case the year 3, will be used as the principal, and so on and so forth. So you see where this is going. It's the same thing. We need to calculate the interest earned, and this becomes 12.1 actually. And now we need to add this 12.1 to the principal. So 121 plus 12.1, that gives us 133 with 10 cents. So that means that after 3 years, if we invested using compound interest, we get $133 with 10 cents. Obviously, this is more than the $130 we're getting by simply using simple interest, right? Okay, so as you can see, when you invest using compound interest, it is a lot, you get a lot more. Now, you might say that an extra $3.10 is not much when you use compound interest, right? You might say that. However, what if we invested, instead of $100, we invested $10,000? Okay, let's underline this. And what if instead of 10%, we used 20% of interest instead of 10? And instead of 3 years, as the previous example, we used it for 10 years. Now, just quickly, because we're gonna dive more into this on our next on the next video, on the next example. But let's use these parameters: $10,000 as an investment, 20% interest in 10 years, and compare both simple interest and compound interest. So let me just collect the data here. The principal would be $10,000. The interest rate would be, in this case, 20%, and the time would be 10 years. Well, I'm not going to go over all the calculations, but using simple interest, using simple interest, what happens? If you invest $10,000 after 10 years using simple interest, you get $20,000. That's actually not a very bad deal. You get double of what you invested. What if we used compound interest? Well, I'm going to spare you all the calculations, but using compound interest with the same parameters for 10 years, we get $61,917 with 36 cents. Now you tell me, which one would you choose? Simple interest or compound interest? Yeah, I would choose compound interest too.